And we're back for another episode of the Dreamer Comics podcast. I'm your host, Omar Spahi, and we're live here up in Portland, Oregon, with none other than comic icon, Jim Valentino.
How you doing?
Good. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Sure.
It's exciting to be here and exciting to have you on the show.
Yeah, it's nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So I wanted to start by asking you, what was your first experience as a fan in comics? Like, what did you
As a fan or as a reader?
As a reader, as a fan, whatever you were reading, kind of got you into comics.
First comic I remember actually reading was when I'm about 4 years old. And I'm at a cousin's house on Long Island. And he had this coverless copy of this book with this guy in red spandex who was chasing after the slowest guy in the world. And it wasn't until years later that I realized that was Showcase 4.
Wow.
So
that's
as far back as it goes.
Yeah, that's incredible. So that was like the Flash and the Turtle.
Yeah.
That's really cool to kind of know that you kind of grew up on the same kind of comics we all did. Because I feel like my first comic book was a Flash book. So.
Oh yeah.
After that, what was your first kind of working in comics job? How did you know you kind of wanted to work in comics?
Oh, I always wanted to work in comics all my life. There was never a time when I didn't want to do comics. The first way I started was doing what we used to call mini comics, small press comics. So they were homemade jobbers that you did on a Xerox machine because printing like that had become easily accessible during the mid-'70s, I think, or something like that. So that's basically where I started. And then I went on from there to doing Normal Man for Aardvark Vanaheim and eventually Marvel and then Image.
So let's go back to your Normal Man days. And you started that, before that you were doing little ash cans in the back of Cerberus, is that right? Little kind of add-on stories, was that, do you remember?
In Cerebus, yeah, there were. I had done one story in Cerebus 50 that had come from those small press comics. And then I met Denny Lubert at San Diego Comic-Con. And she had talked to me before the show about possibly doing a book for them, but had told me that Dave Sim was kind of worried that I'd get them into trouble because my comics were not safe for work. So I came up with something really innocuous. I lived in a part of San Diego called Normal Heights, and I came up with Normal Man.
I like it. And so Normal Man it was supposed to run originally for 13 issues, right? And
12 issues plus an annual.
So 12 issues
13.
Yeah. And it ended up running 8. And then
No, it ran 12.
It ran 12? It ran the full...
Oh yeah, it ran
series.
the full thing.
Oh.
It just ran part of it in Aardvark Vanaheim, part of it in Renegade Press.
That's how it goes. And so I know you did there was also an Image book you did with Normal Man not too long ago.
Oh yeah. There were a couple of them. There was one that was the 20th anniversary or something like that, and then we just reprinted Normal Man, Megaton Man in the back of Splitting Image, 80-page giant, and then I did a collection of all the Normal Man stuff called The Complete Normal Man, which someone asked if I do another Normal Man story, what are we going to call it? And I said, well, The Completer Normal. Just makes sense.
It makes sense to keep it growing, and then it's going to be The Completest after that.
And The Completest and The Completer, and yeah.
So what was your first job writing in comic books? How did you know to write and draw? What was the process like as
I always did it.
You
just always did both.
In high school, in elementary
Yeah, always
school?
did both. A lot of the stories that I wrote in the autobiographical books were stories that were told orally and got the timing down and everything, and then when I was ready to draw them, I knew exactly how to do it.
Yeah, because it's in your head. You don't have to.
But I always did both. They were never separate to me.
So, did you practice just drawing in class and kind of just getting better, or did you attend a school formally? Or?
No, I never attended any kind of formal school. I just drew on everything, whether it was moving or not. So.
I love it. So you once interviewed Jack Kirby.
Yeah.
And you asked him how many pages he draws in a week.
Yes.
And do you remember what you said he responded?
Yeah, he he said he drew 17 pages a week.
Wow.
And that got a big from everyone in the audience. And then he said that didn't count layouts and covers. And I looked at him and said, how could you do that? I said, most guys can't draw 17 pages in a month. How did you do that? And he looked at me and he held up his finger and he said, I learned what not to draw. God has spoken. Okay.
I love it. And I mean, he is very much the godfather of comics in a lot of ways.
Oh, yeah.
And besides him, who are your other inspirations in comics?
Well, I was born in 1952. So in 1962, I'm 9 and 10 years old. So my influences were all those guys from DC Silver Age and the early Marvel Age. So Kirby, Ditko, Carmine Infantino, Gil Kane, Wally Wood, Murphy Anderson, just all those guys were influential. Kurt Swan. And then in 1972, I was 20. So that's when the underground comics came in. So Robert Crumb and Vaughn Bodie and Justin Green and all those other guys were very, very influential at a crucial point in my life. And then there were the contemporary people like George Perez and Jim Starlin and people, Bernie Wrightson, people like that had a strong, strong influence in where I wanted to go. And that's not to mention friends like Rob Liefeld, who was a very strong influence on me.
It's really amazing to hear kind of all these people who you kind of grew up loving and getting a chance to work in that same industry of them, and people who you worked alongside of and kind of find inspiration with that as well.
Yeah, it's great.
So we're talking about Jack and how he worked so fast. How important is it to work fast in comics?
In order to keep on a monthly schedule, if you're looking at doing monthly comics, you have to do a page a day. And here's the calculus, here's how it works. There are roughly 30 days in every month. So you have 22 pages of story plus a cover. If you want a day off, and you should take a day off, otherwise you're going to kill yourself, you have to do a page a day, every day. So that's it.
I mean, yeah, it's so important to have books come out on time, especially in the comic book industry, because if there's so much out there now that if you kind of miss a month, the readers forget what they read and they don't want to go back and pick up the next issue because they're like, it's been too long, or I don't remember what happened in the last one. It's a 30-day,
Yeah.
It's a 30-day process, and especially with so much content coming out.
Comics are a habitual medium.
Yep.
And if you're not there on time when people expect you to be, they're not coming back.
Yep.
You have a good chance of losing them.
And it's important to keep the fans and keep them growing, and especially because you work so hard at it, you don't want to see that number decline just because you didn't get the pages turned in.
Yeah, well, there's going to be a point of attrition anyways, regardless. But you know that going in.
So, you were working at Renegade Press, and how did that come to be? Like, what was the process getting there?
Well, I wasn't working at there. The process of getting there was Dave and Denny Sim did Aardvark Vanaheim, and then they got a divorce, and Dave did Aardvark, and Denny went and founded Renegade Press. And so all the books that weren't Cerebus went with Denny, and Dave kept Cerebus for himself, and that was the way they wanted it. He never really wanted to be a publisher, and she did. So that's kind of the way it worked.
And Cerebus was one of the longest running comic
independent
books.
Comics, yeah.
It was, I think,
300 issues. Yeah.
And Steve Siegel was telling me that yesterday, and he was mentioning how Cerebus was kind of just a very iconic book.
It was one of the most iconic. I think probably because of length of time. It was also, an extremely well written and well drawn book. So that's got a lot to do with it.
So whenever you've always had like a foothold on like the indie market.
Yeah.
How did that come to be? Like, what was the
It goes back to those influences that I was talking about, because I was so influenced by when I was a kid by superhero comics, which I still love to this day. I always love them, and also influenced by underground comics, and then again, as time went on, by independent comics. So I don't see any separation of state here at all. Comics are comics. If they're well done, if they're well executed, if they have a good idea, then that's great.
That's what it's about. I agree with you. It's just about producing quality work in whatever medium. And And now it's, especially with like the web comics and stuff like that coming online, I think the barrier to entry has become, very accessible for a lot of people. So
Yeah, absolutely. And there are people who are forgoing the traditional routes. Renee Telleringer, Erica Moen here in town. She doesn't go through the normal channels, but she has an extremely successful web comic, and she prints it out and does great. So the younger kids are coming up with their own ideas, and good for them.
that's what it's about. So after you had finished Normal Man and Renegade, you started working at Marvel.
Not right away, but within a couple of years.
What were you doing in between?
I worked in animation, actually,
nice.
for a while. I was the storyboard artist, did a few books in between. I did a book called Valentino, which was autobiographical stuff. I worked on things here and there, trying to change my style over from cartoony to more mainstream. But I worked in animation mostly.
So what was it like? How did you come to work at Marvel? Like, what was the process in like growing up reading Marvel books to coming to work there? How did that happen?
I was sharing a studio with Rob Liefeld. Rob had just gotten, I don't know if he had gotten New Mutants yet or not. I'm not real sure. But he was doing some work for Marvel. And, or he was doing work for DC and was about to transfer over to Marvel. I can't remember. Anyways, we were going up to the Oakland used to have a comic convention, so we were heading up there. So I had written out several pitches. One of them was for a book Rob and I wanted to do together called Young Avengers, which eventually became a book. And at the time, I don't think we were aware that they were working on a book called New Warriors, which would have been the Young Avengers, kind of the same idea. The idea was take the young teenage characters and do the Teen Titans, except do them for Marvel. And I was going to write it, Rob was going to draw it. And there were several other pitches in there. At the last minute, I was looking through the Marvel Universe handbook, and I was looking predominantly for characters that nobody had touched in a long time. So I came across the Guardians of the Galaxy, and I called up Rob, and I said, "What do you think of them?" And he said he thought they looked cool, but they didn't have a story. So I thought about it for a day or two, and then came up with the idea, why not explore the Marvel Universe in the 31st century? So I typed that up really quickly, and I drew a picture really quickly. We headed up to the convention, and I pitched it to Mark Gruenwald and Tom DeFalco, and that was the one they went for.
That's so cool. And I think Tom had a pitch at the time for it. And
Tom had said that he had come up with an idea that he wanted to move it 500 years in the future and do that. And so I said, I can give you a lead into that. And I did that in one of the early issues, issue 8, I think, where I gave him a lead so that it could expand and become the Galactic Guardians.
That's cool. It's really cool, especially to see, in continuity, see characters kind of in the future and kind of see their life in 500 years, if they're immortal or what happens to them, and what their legacy is on the universe at the time.
Yeah, when before I started the book, Mark Gruenwald made me do a list of every character and where they would be 1,000 years from now. And I thought he was busting my chops at first, but it actually proved really valuable in the sense that I really did get an idea of who would be around, who wouldn't be around, that kind of thing. And it had the freedom of just being an alternate future.
Yeah.
So anything that I did didn't really affect anyone else. And as a result of that, I was only told no, that I couldn't do something twice during the whole run.
Wow. That's incredible to have that kind of relationship there.
Yeah.
So let's back up a little bit further. When did you meet Rob Liefeld?
1989, I think. I'm not real sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
And do you remember how you guys met, or it was?
Yeah, we met through a mutual friend, Brian Murray. Brian knew Rob, and we met through that, and Rob and I just got along real well together.
That's fantastic. You guys ended up sharing the studio.
Yeah.
And then fast forward to 1992, and Rob approached you with this idea.
No, it was 1991.
It was 1991.
Yeah.
Because it launched in 92.
All right.
So in 1991, he approached you with this idea. What was the idea?
Well, he didn't just talk to me. He talked to the 3 people. There were 4 of us, Todd, not 3, 4. Todd always forgets that I was part of that. He talked to Todd McFarlane, Eric Larson, and me. And those were the 3 people he felt closest to, that would keep the secret. Eric signed on immediately, much to his credit. Todd vacillated. He was kind of retired at the time. He wanted to make hockey cards at the time. Didn't want to do comics anymore. So, and I wasn't on a million-selling book. I was the only one that wasn't on a million-selling book, and I had 5 kids, to support. So for me, it was a much harder decision. So Rob and Todd were going to New York for the Sotheby's auction. This was the very first auction of original comic pages, and they were auctioning off Jim's X-Men #1, Todd's X-Force #1, and Todd's Spider-Man #1, the entire issues.
Wow.
Yeah. So Todd calls me up and said that he had Eric Larson already signed in, and him and Robbie were going, and wanted to know if I was going to sign up. And I went, okay, I'm in. I just said, are you going to do this for sure? He was, yeah. Okay, I'm in. So I went home that night to tell my wife that I just made the biggest mistake of my life, or the best decision I ever made. And she was supportive. She thought it was a good decision. So they go to New York. They have the infamous meeting with Terry Stewart, where Rob basically told him to turn his desk upside down and shove it. And I get this call from Rob a couple days later, and he told me that they had met Mark Silvestri in the hallway, pulled him to one side, Todd did the spiel on him, and Mark was in. Wow. And then he called me up a little while later and said they just got Jim Lee. So I had told 2 people about what was going on. One of them was Eric Stevenson, and the other one was Larry Marder. And Eric, I wanted to get his take on it because he was a fan at the time. He hadn't done anything professionally or anything like that. And he was completely knocked out by what I told him. And Larry, when I said, they just got Jim Lee to sign on, Larry went dead silent, which is something he almost never does. And then he went, you guys are going to do so much damage.
And that's what the sci-fi documentary is called.
Yes.
So Much Damage.
So Much Damage.
Based on that from you. And
yeah.
It's crazy to think about how much it's evolved and grown over the last 26 years, 27 years now?
26.
It's really something special. So how did you come up with Shadowhawk? So Shadowhawk was your first title through Image.
Yeah. It was when I was doing the Guardians of the Galaxy at Marvel, and the most popular character in the book was Starhawk, which was a character I just hated passionately. So I decided to just turn up the volume to 12 on him, and I made him into a really nasty character. And he went away and came back, and he was dark, because in those days everybody was dark. Yeah. So I wanted to change his name from Starhawk to Shadowhawk. And Tom DeFalco called me up and said, yeah, we can't do that. He said, we got to keep the name Starhawk. He said, but I really like the name Shadowhawk. Why don't you come up with a new character? So I always listened to Tom DeFalco, and I came up with a new character.
There you go.
So there you go. That was it.
I love it. And so let's back up for a second, just back to where you and Rob were talking. What made you decide to roll the dice on kind of joining Image? Like, what was the thing that...
There were a couple of things. It seemed to me that if it was just Rob and Eric and I, it would be okay, but probably wouldn't go over the mound. I mean, a lot of people had left Marvel and DC and done their art books and failed miserably. With Todd signing on, that, I think, put it over the top. And then, of course, when they got Jim Lee and Mark to sign on, well, that was just, what had once been an avalanche had just become an atomic bomb. And Jim, in the first meeting, brought in Wills, who was an incredible artist, really great guy. So it was sort of like, wow, how can this lose?
Yeah. We're actually interviewing Wills on...
Sweetest guy in the world, yeah, you'll love him.
Yeah, an Ontario Comic Con in a few weeks. So
yeah, great guy.
Excited
tell him I said hello.
We'll definitely tell him you said hello. And so, what other projects right now are coming out through Shadowline, and what's the...
About a year or so ago, I just kicked it back, after working several hundred years, and just tired and wanted to take a little bit of a break. So I've only been doing Rat Queens for about the last year or so. In July, we're coming out with a book called Memoirs of a Very Stable Genius. It's by Shannon Wheeler. It's got a bunch of his stories in it and gag cartoons and stuff like that. So I'm really looking forward to that. There are several other books in the pipeline that I'm just not ready to talk about yet. They're gestating. I'm waiting until we get a couple issues in the can, and then we'll schedule them.
You got to make sure you come out on time. So that's what it's about. You want to make sure to always be ahead of the curve. So.
The funny thing is Image, particularly in the early days, had a reputation for always having late books. It wasn't quite true. If you look at the Image partners, it was 3 and 3. That there were 3 guys who did group books, who had large studios filled with mostly young artists, who loved nothing better than going out on tour and acting like rock stars, and all their books were late. And then there were 3 guys who did solo books, whose books were pretty much always on time, who just stuck to the grindstone and could have cared less about being celebrities. So I'll let you guys figure out which are which.
So, what? After that, you became before that you became publisher of Image Central. So you were publisher for Image.
That didn't happen until 1999.
1999.
Yeah.
And what did you do to find new comics? What was the process like? Would you take submissions? Would people come to you? What was the process?
Virtually everything. Everything was. There were people that we called up, and asked if they wanted to do a book. People like Keith Giffen, for example, that we had known for a while. There were people that I remember. At Chicago Comic Con one year, there was the Hyatt. There was this small little escalator. I'm going up the escalator, and there's this very tall, large guy with really long blonde hair, and he turns around. Oh, Jim Valentino. I'm Joseph Michael Linsner. And I was like, hey, do a book for us, man. It's like, oh, you're kidding. Like, no, love your work. It was like, we got submissions through the mail, from people that. Just blind submissions. I can't remember who, but we got them. There were other people that called up, like Brian Bendis, and it was just everything, and from everywhere that you could imagine. People that recommended it to us. I remember John Romita Jr. came up to me at one time and said that he was thinking about doing an independent book. And he said he talked to Joe Quesada, and Joe Quesada said, go talk to Jim. So, it's stuff like that happened.
Yeah, it's a small industry. It really is a small industry of people who want to work in comics and find a way to make it happen.
Yeah, pretty much.
You're credited with bringing in a lot, and I mean a lot of great creators in comics, like Jim Mafood, Brian Michael Bendis, Curtis Weeb,
Robert Kirkman.
Yeah. Eric Stevenson, Riley Rossmo, Joshua Williamson, and that's just some of them.
Yeah.
What can you attribute your success to finding all these great creators and have them come through you for their first kind of published work? Or
dumb luck. I don't know. I look for people that have a unique voice, that have something to say, that are interesting. on one level or another that bring interesting ideas and are able to fully realize them. Sometimes those people, they started out not quite ready for prime time, but real close to it. And all they needed was some encouragement and to allow them to develop. Kirkman had done, 4 or 5 books for us before Walking Dead.
Yeah.
Before Walking Dead started to take off. So it was a matter of just, I know this guy's got it. He's just looking for the right vehicle. The same thing with Curtis Weave. It was just a matter of, he's got it. He's got something there, but he just hasn't found the right vehicle to get across. And then, he did Rat Queens, which got him across, and Kirkman did Walking Dead, and Invincible started rising as a result of Walking Dead. So, yeah, but at the time, he didn't have much of a track record. Invincible was going down in sales, and I remember Eric and I called him, put him on speakerphone, and we said, what can you do? What can you do to help us, to goose some sales, to get, something going? And he said, well, I got this idea for issue 25. And we were like, okay, what? And he said that in issue 25 it was going to be revealed that Invincible's father wasn't Superman, but he was actually the first of an alien invasion force. And we were like, that's great! Do that!
So cool.
Yeah. I said, when's the earliest you can do that? He goes, well, I don't want to do it till issue 25. I'm like, no, Robert, you're not going to make it to issue 25. Do that as quickly as possible. So he did it in issue 8, and the sales just started spiking up immediately as a result of it.
It was so cool because as a fan reading Invincible, it was kind of like Invincible was able to come into his own at that point. He
Yes.
kind of stood his ground and said, listen, I'm not going to join you, and it's something that was so cool and so powerful.
It also changed the dynamic of the book enormously because Invincible up to that point looked like a Superboy clone.
Yep.
And after that turned that whole milieu on its head completely.
And you knew he was coming back, and it was gonna end in a fun way.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to go to the comments real quick, and Brian Haberlin says hi.
Hey, Brian.
He does Faster Than Light.
Yes.
And he is fantastic. And
he's doing Spawn Medieval Witchblade right now.
Oh, nice. That just came out it's on the Image Comics app.
Yeah.
And people can go pick that up. And one of my personal mentors is here, Ross Ritchie, who says, Jim Valentino is a legend who makes comics better, and you're the best.
Oh, thanks, Ross. He's a great guy.
And yeah. So, what's the most important quality you need to survive in comic books?
God. Well, you need thick skin when you're starting out. You need to produce, and you need to produce a lot. And you need to keep on, for most people, you need to keep moving forward. That you can't stagnate, you can't rest on laurels. You got to keep your eye on the ball. It's tough. It's really hard to break into comics, but after you've broken in, it becomes even harder because deadlines are merciless. They just come at you and come at you and come at you, and they just don't ever stop. And you constantly have to reprove yourself over and over again. You have to have a thick enough skin to understand that one editor or one publisher may not like what you do, but that doesn't mean that what you do has no merit. In my rejection note that I send out to people, I just say, just because it doesn't fit Shadowline doesn't mean it's without merit. And I wish you all the best of luck with this.
And that's beautiful, because I think it's important to make sure people have a way that they can continue to kind of push forward, because even if people aren't there yet, they can continue to keep pushing and either find somewhere that's the right fit for it. Because a lot of publishers have a certain brand identity with them,
right?
And a lot of people who submit to comics don't know that.
Yeah, that's another thing. You should do your homework about a publisher. You really should do your homework. If you're drawing Spider-Man pages, don't give them to DC. Mm-hmm. They don't do Spider-Man. And that kind of thing. I mean, just look at, the differences, and there are differences between Boom and IDW and Image and Oni and all the rest of them, because there are differences. Dark Horse, and go in that direction. Look, but also remember that you can do the book that you want to do, and that's wonderful, and you should do the book that you want to do. But no one is obligated to buy it.
Yep.
And that includes editors, publishers, and fans. And you have to remember that.
You have to go out there and market your own book, and if you really stand by your work, you have to find a way to make sure people pick it up.
And you also have to be, when you realize that a book isn't flying, and take the Robert Kirkman path, because when he realized the book wasn't flying, he just turned over another book, just like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, there's always some, I'm a huge comic fan. There's always a question that kind of like baffled me. What was Robert Kirkman's Walking Dead? Started off, issue 1 was like here,
Mm-hmm.
and then like issue 2 ended up going slightly lower,
Mm-hmm.
and then all of a sudden issue 3 just kind of like went higher than issue 1. Like what do you attribute that kind of success to, or like what do you think was that?
Well, especially on a monthly book, retailers are ordering blind. Okay, they're ordering blind. Now, in the case of Walking Dead, there were two variables. One was that, as I told him, which he loves to repeat, zombie books don't sell. They did not sell, ever. Walking Dead is the exception. It isn't the rule, it's the exception. Zombie books still don't sell. I'd say there's only one possible exception to that, and that's iZombie. Okay? But other than that, zombie books do not sell. And that's what I told him. So retailers are ordering a genre that traditionally doesn't sell, and they're ordering it from a writer who didn't have a real great track record at that time. So they're ordering kind of conservatively, which is right. You have to remember all the way across the board, this is a business, and a retailer cannot stay in business if he's got dead inventory, if he's putting out money for books that he can't sell. He's going to go out of business. So issue 2, they're ordering completely blind. But by the time they put in their final orders for issue 3, they've seen how issue 1 performs. And now, if it's performed well, if it's sold out, if they've had to reorder, they're going to tick up their orders. I believe we reprinted Walking Dead #1 at a 25% overage over what had been ordered. So it was able to be reordered. So at the last possible moments, retailers were able to tick their orders up, and then they saw sell-through on #2, okay, and on like that.
That's amazing. So we have some people here who just want to say hi. So PJ Katakutsin has a question for you, actually. He says, what was it like seeing Taserface on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2?
My son Aaron created Taserface when he was 5 years old.
Wow.
Okay? Which is why I used it, and why I titled that first story, Are They Ready for Taserface? Because I thought the name was just as silly as Two-Face or Prune-Face or any of the other faces that were in comics. So, he's 32 now, so that gives you some idea about how long ago it was. His comment after, we laughed, his comment after the movie was that he wished they would have said it was a name so dumb only a 5-year-old would have thought of it. And I said, but they didn't know you were 5 at the time. How could they have known that? So yeah, we enjoyed it. We've enjoyed all the toys, and thank you, James Gunn. You almost made up for butchering Yondu, but
So, Matthias Lewis says he just wants to remind you and all the viewers out there watching that we have all these comic books that we're talking about in local comic book stores, and to go out there, pick them up, check them out. If there's anything you hear about that you like, that you're like, I wanted to read that, or I never got around to it, go check out your local comic book store. And
a better idea, even, if I may, is to support your local comic book store. Look through previews. If you see something that you like, give your retailer half of the money so that he knows you're serious and that you'll come back and you'll give him the other half. Order those comics in advance, and please pay them, because they're living on small margins and we need to keep them in business.
Absolutely. I mean, if you have pre-orders coming in, you know how much more to order and you don't end up without a book. And I think as a
That's
fan,
right. Yeah.
I get to the store sometimes and I'm like, I wanted to read that. You ordered one copy of that?
Part of the problem is communicating.
Of course.
Communicate with your retailer, and retailers communicate with their fans and with their purchasers. And what you do is it's easier to order that way.
Absolutely. So you've always kind of had a good read on the indie market, and you used that to drive a lot of success when you were publisher at Image. Are you happy to see Image kind of as a home for new comics, like new diversity in comics?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. We were always called a superhero company, which was never true. The thing is that the original Image founders did superhero comics for one very important reason. We like superhero comics for one, but mostly it was because we had seen over and over and over again really top name talent leave Marvel and DC and do a book that was completely different from their Marvel and DC work and totally lose all their fan base. We didn't want to do that. We wanted to compete directly with Marvel and DC. And the easiest way for us to do that was to do superhero comics. But if you look even back to the earliest days of Image, there were books like Todd's, what was it called? The Bruise Crew. I can't remember the name of it. But we did books like Bone and Gru,
yep,
and The Max, and there were Jim had started Homage, which did Strangers from Paradise. No one seems to remember this.
Yeah.
So it was like we all had an intent, I think, to drop stuff. We all had an intent to do stuff that was different than superhero comics, so to open it up a bit better. For me, it was like most of my friends were doing that. So all the back covers of Shadowhawk promoted independent comics, Bean World, Understanding Comics, basically all my friends.
Yeah. It's so cool because I feel like it's something that a lot of people don't do is go back and look at that old stuff, but they have giant volumes of Gru now and the artist editions and all that stuff. As a newer fan, I still go back and look at that stuff and kind of pay homage to it in a way because it was so cutting edge for its time. I feel like a lot of people weren't doing stuff that wasn't superhero based, so it was interesting to kind of see that.
Well, there were always people that promoted non-superhero, non-genre stuff. I mean, you had Eclipse in the early days. Certainly Dark Horse did a lot of it.
Yep.
So we weren't the first by any means. But I was glad to play a small role in that, and seeing what Image is now today as a result of it it gives me a lot of satisfaction, and I feel very vindicated that my vision for the company was right.
So I have one last question for you.
Okay.
What is any advice you have for any aspiring creators, writers, artists, letterers, editors, publishers? What advice do you have for them?
Run. That's the best advice. Now, the best thing to do is be true to yourself. Do what you want to do. If that means you want to do Spider-Man for the rest of your career, do it. Just do the best Spider-Man you can. If you want to tell personal stories, do that. If follow your own yourself, be true to yourself, and you will never sell out because you can't. You can't sell yourself out. If this is what you want to do, if this is where your heart is at, that's what you should do. But you should also examine yourself a bit, and ask yourself some questions. Are you a self-starter? Can you wake up in the morning and go to work without anybody telling you to? Mm-hmm. Do you know what to get done? Do you understand that once you start working in comics, you're basically in business for yourself? You need to understand that. You need to understand taxes, contracts, get a lawyer to read any contracts that you may sign. There's nothing wrong with work for hire as long as you know what you're doing.
Absolutely.
Okay? There's nothing wrong with it. There are royalty plans, there are interesting stuff, but do what you feel you want to do. That's the most important thing.
Just going to take a quick second to just talk about a few comments.
Okay.
Mark Lombardi chimed in and said, I just want to thank Jim for being such a great influence and a great person to work with, and most of all, for being someone you can count on for honesty.
Okay, that's a double-edged sword.
And have some good questions. So one of them was directed towards me, but I'm going to ask you instead. Do you ever create characters based on people you know in real life?
Almost every character that you create, the personalities, are usually an amalgam of various people that you've known in real life. That's where you draw personalities from. So, yeah.
And Adam Halverson says hell yes to the max, and
I agree.
got a lot of fans out there. So it's thank you for coming on the show and talking comics, and it's been a pleasure to have you.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Just want to quickly say thank you to our producers, JJ and Flotron over here, who have
Hey, guys.
You're doing a great job, and a special thank you to Image and Shadowline for having us and putting us up, and
the beautiful new Image offices here in Portland.
Love it.
Thanks to Kat and to Eric and to everybody here.
yeah, the team's done a great job.
Yep, they're good people.
So thank you to Image and Shadowline for having us.
Okay, man.